theaters have a custom. No matter if the seats are empty or the aisles are dark, no matter if dust has settled on the stage, they leave a light on for us. The Ghostlight.
Hi, folks. Good evening. I'm Brooke Ishibashi, a co-organizer of Be an Arts Hero. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here for the Ghostlight panel, changing the conversation about the creative economy, discussing the socioeconomic impact of the arts and culture sector in the U.S. and how to save the arts economy. This is a part of Be an Arts Hero's Labor Day of action called Arts Workers Unite. And we are very happy to be mobilizing arts workers all across the country with institutions all across the country, celebrities, prominent figures, etc., all conveying to Congress the massive immediate need for relief for the arts and culture sector in America. And a bit about Be an Arts Hero. We are an intersectional grassroots movement emphasizing arts and culture's $877 billion value-added contribution to the economy, and highlighting the economic and human toll of letting that contribution collapse. We are a united sector-wide coalition calling for Congress to extend federal pandemic unemployment compensation, subsidize COBRA, and to support our legislation titled the Dawn Act, which would allocate $43.85 billion with a B in proportionate relief to the arts and culture sector. I am so thrilled to have our tremendous lineup of guests here joining us tonight. I'm going to introduce you folks, and if you wouldn't mind pulling them up onto the screen one by one, Jenny, and for you folks to say where you're tuning in from. So first we have Nataki Garrett, Artistic Director of Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Hi, everybody. I'm sitting here in Ashland, Oregon.
So good to see you, Nataki.
Good to see you.
And next we have Annaleigh Ashford, Tony Award-winning actor and singer. Where are you tuning in from, Annaleigh?
Hi, I'm tuning in from Los Angeles.
Wonderful. So wonderful seeing you. I'll see you in a bit. And next we have Nikkole Salter, Chair of Political Engagement Committee of the Dramatists Guild, Chair of Theater Communications Group, and Obie Award-winning Pulitzer Prize-nominated actor playwright, Nikkole Salter. Nikkole, where are you, I guess I should say, streaming in from today?
Yes, I am streaming in from Bloomfield, New Jersey, just outside of New York City.
Wonderful. So great seeing you.
Good seeing you too.
And next we have Professor Michael Seman, a professor, economist, researcher, co-author of Brookings Institution's Lost Art, Measuring COVID-19's Devastating Impact on America's Creative Economy. And Professor, where are you streaming in from today?
Hello, Fort Collins, Colorado.
I think Annaleigh from Colorado too, right? Got some Colorado folks in the house. And next up, folks, we have Kenney M. Green, producing artistic director of the Depot Theater in the Adirondacks, musician, singer, nightlife entertainer, multi-talented human, Kenney M. Green. Kenney, where are you tuning in from today?
Hi, I'm tuning in from Harlem, New York.
All right, folks, and last but not least, Mr. Peter Marks, chief theater critic of the Washington Post. Mr. Peter Marks, where are you joining us from tonight?
Hey, Brooke. Hey, everybody. What a distinguished panel to be part of. I'm thrilled. And I am streaming to you from Lower Manhattan, right at the point where the East and Hudson Rivers meet.
Wonderful. And we can keep Peter on the screen here, Jenny. You know, I'm going to go around the room and talk to all you folks about the personal impact of COVID, of the pandemic, upon all of you folks, individually, in terms of your line of work, in terms of your community members. I would love to hear a tidbit, a slice about that from each of you. So Peter, could you briefly illustrate, where you were when the shutdown occurred and how the pandemic has affected your industry?
Well, as you can imagine, Brooke, it has devastated what I do for a living as a person whose butt is in the seats always for theater. I have not had that privilege in 6 months. And where I was the day before all this happened was in my seat on the aisle to watch a musical called Six on Broadway. And as I typed my review into the computer, I will tell you that the producers of Thick Six will be happy to hear it was a rave, but it never ran. And just as I was about to push the button to send it to my editors, the Broadway shut down, as did most of theater in America. And the impact on people who love and write about the theater, of course, has been tremendous. I have tried to fill the gap in between by moving from criticism to reporting on the devastation to the field. And I continue to do that. And I hope to learn some important things tonight as I listen to these other terrific guests.
And Peter, we're so grateful to have you join us, as a leading journalist in America and as a major thought leader in America. It is incredibly meaningful to have you join us. So thank you. And speaking to Six, I think when we speak about the larger devastation of the shutdowns in our industry, if I'm not mistaken, I believe a lot of the participants, the arts workers involved in Six were female, BIPOC, and some of them were making Broadway debuts, in a larger scale. I think we have to think about how opportunities, we were at a time when opportunities were thriving for certain members of our more marginalized communities, and shutdowns like this made some of those opportunities disappear. So I'm very glad that you mentioned Six, because I think it's something that some people just don't stop to think about, that those opportunities were ripe and they were blossoming and then they were taken away in an instant. So thank you so much for mentioning Six.
Well, it's partly the work of Be an Arts Hero that's sort of bringing that to consciousness for everybody, that it's arts workers. It's not just the artists on stage. It's a really important point and very valuable to be stressing.
Correct. It's all the 5.1 million arts workers in America on whose backs the entire sector relies, right? That's what this panel's about. I'm so happy you are here, Peter. Thank you. And I'm going to circle back around to you in a little bit. I would love to hear from Annaleigh. And Annaleigh, would you be able to speak to where you were when the shutdown occurred, how it's affected you, your family, your industry, and all the projects that you've been balancing?
Yeah. The night that the world started to shut down, I was actually in Los Angeles filming a pilot, and I was doing a quick change in the wardrobe room, and that was where I got the news that not just our industry, but the world was completely shutting down. But obviously our industry is an industry that is dependent on human contact and dependent on people connecting with each other. So obviously in that room, all of these beautiful people that I was working with who were not on the camera, they were off the camera. Everybody did that sort of mad dash to look ahead, to figure out how to start reorganizing and rethinking what their life was going to look like. And I think that has been sort of the constant theme of our industry in every position, in every capacity. As artists, we don't know what's coming next. We live in sort of that state of, I don't know what next year is going to look like. So in some ways, I think that we have managed the anxiety, the emotional sort of warfare that has come along with this land of unknown, because as artists, we're better versed in handling that. At the same time, it's been heartbreaking to watch so many people in my life who are more in the world of theater really reevaluate how they can use their skills and talents to continue to be creative, to continue to connect with people, because the outlook is so uncomfortable. And more than that, really reevaluate the constructs of our theater community, and that's financial and social. So this is, I hope, a time for great change as we sit and wait. And thank God, as artists, we have glimmers of hope that we can share with the rest of the world. I think you can hear my kids screaming in the other room. Can you hear that? But yeah, lots of out of work screaming children, which is like acting anyways.
I'm so glad we had cameos from your family, because I want to speak more to that later in the discussion about balancing, for caregivers, for parents in the industry. This is a whole other conversation, especially for women, about maternity leave, about childcare, and how you balance all of that. So I would love to dig into that a little deeper in our conversation in a little bit. But I have to brag on you for just a second, Annaleigh. When you were a graduating senior at Marymount, I was an incoming freshman, and there was the lore of Annaleigh Ashford at Marymount Manhattan College, and I have to say, not beyond your talent, Annaleigh, your reputation for hustling and for being one of the hardest workers that I'd ever seen was just resounded throughout the entire college. And so when you speak to, all of the work, I think, you're so blessed because you're working constantly across all genres. But I think what is interesting, what I think is so interesting and compelling about you is that you understand what it's like to, I see a toy. You understand what it's like to be Spider-Man, to balance it all. Hi, friend. What's your name?
So
we're going to call you Spider-Man.
That's Jack.
Hi,
it's okay.
Jack.
It's amazing that this just happened. Oh my. So my husband is also an actor. First of all, did you hear that? I mean, you couldn't plan it.
On cue.
That is so kind of you. Those words are just mean more than you know to me, especially right now in this moment when that means so much to me. But my husband's also an actor. And he's been coaching quite a bit college senior or high school seniors for their college auditions. And it's just, you just saw the navigation happen. We thought he was watching a movie, and then we were, doing that kind of parenting, which we had to in this moment. But so I'm glad Spider-Man made an appearance. That is real life.
Do we have the rights for that? We'll figure it out later. Annaleigh, I'm so grateful that I'm so grateful we had that interlude. But I also wanted to say, you're something that was so interesting to me when we were all, looking up to you at Marymount, is that you were doing a million things at once. And I think that was the first glimpse I have of, oh my Lord, if I want to do this professionally, you were auditioning, you were constantly working, and you were going to school. So the idea that the hustle meant that arts workers are laborers, and that work never ends, that it's ongoing, and that every contract ends, every job ends. It was made very evident to me when I watched you as an example at Marymount. So I just wanted to acknowledge that you were, I think, a very early example for me of what life as a professional arts worker was going to be like. And to this day, everyone at Marymount still holds you up to that, so I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, and thank you for your kind words.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see you in a sec. Maybe bring back Spider-Man.
Oh.
So let's bring up Kenney next when you have a moment, Jenny. And Kenney, I would love to hear about how this crisis has impacted your community, the nightlife scene, your theater community, being a musician, entertainer. How has this? Where were you when the shutdown occurred, and how has this impacted your community at large?
Well, it's been interesting. I was first of all, thank you for having me here. I on my when I'm not running our theater in upstate New York, in the city, I am a piano player for a sing-along piano bar, and I work at two others. And I just started. I got a call from some friends in Jersey City to come to a new piano bar that was opening up, called Pianist Envy, and they asked if I would want to come and play and do some show tune sing-alongs out there. And the day that we shut down, I just played my last shift on a Saturday night in March, and we got the shutdown on Sunday, and the bar is now closed. So as far as the impact goes in that aspect for nightlife, we are losing our spaces left and right, and my fellow entertainers, they just don't know what they're going to do. It's crazy. So that's where I was, and as far as the theater goes, we had just I just sent out my last equity submissions to be posted, so we could start our summer season, which was working the Mountaintop, Barnum, and Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill, and the shutdown. I sent them out on a Friday afternoon. The shutdown happened on a Sunday, so we started brainstorming on Monday what we were going to do, and since then the impact has been some of the hardest phone calls I've ever made as an artistic director, and that is calling extremely wonderful people, our set designers, our directors, choreographers, costumes, and letting them know that we didn't have a job for them, and I didn't know when one would happen. So that's what's been on this side of the horizon.
It's incredibly devastating, Kenney, to think about the number of arts laborers who were just completely devastated when the domino effect of the shutdown just swept the entire nation. You know, I think about a company like yours, and you have a focus on racial justice, you have a focus on social issues, and I think about the content that you were about to share with the world, and how all of those opportunities are they're just gone for the time being.
Yeah, and you know, for our community in particular in upstate New York and Westport, New York, the two shows in particular I feel were very important to our community. It's not a secret that some of it's pretty red up there as opposed to blue, and shining light on people of color on stage having a place and a voice was very important to me to share with our community this season. And it just so happened that we actually picked our season last August. So with everything that has happened since then, it was even more important that we had, especially the Mountaintop, was even more important that we have that on our stage. And to lose that in this time for these patrons was devastating to me.
Yeah, devastating, I feel, is a term that doesn't quite encompass the human toll, the economic toll, the larger macro toll of what it means to lose projects and pieces of work that can change people's minds and hearts, right? So thank you for speaking to that, Kenney. I would love to bring Nikkole in next. Hey, Nikkole, would you mind speaking about where you were when the shutdown occurred, how this has impacted your communities as playwright, artists, activists, etc.?
Well, needless to say, Brooke, this has been a whirlwind. A friend of mine, her name is May, who sits on my board at TCG, and she said when 2020 began, it was for, 2020 vision, like clarity. But who knew this kind of clarity would come at this higher cost? Happy to see things the way that they actually are so that we can mobilize to do things to improve the situation. But my God. So where was I? I was at the Huntington Theater doing a new play, the debut of Kirsten Greenwich's new work, Our Daughters Like Pillars. We went from, I actually had a moratorium on television and the news, so I hadn't been following anything at all. I come into work and they are telling us that there's something called the coronavirus and that it's spreading and it's bad, but we're okay. We're going to keep working. That afternoon, they told us that we wouldn't have an audience because the institution that housed the theater that we were going to perform in had decided to shut down to the public, but we should continue rehearsing, keep going. And by 5 p.m. that night, they came in and said, everybody pack your stuff, go. One of the members of the opera that had been rehearsing in the venue or in the rehearsal hall that we were also using came down with a fever. And I was like, what is happening? I was completely, I'm laughing now. But it wasn't funny. I was flabbergasted. Then I went to the grocery store and saw that, rice was gone. Rice. I've never been to a grocery store and there's no staples available. And I started to wig out. I started to think about how distant I was from my family, who was all in California, and if the world was come to an end. Since then, I mean, we've suffered many, many tragedies. Terrence McNally, a colleague and a friend of the Dramatists Guild, was the first to come to my knowledge to go. And then my teacher from NYU, Janet Zarish, her husband, Mark Bloom, passed away. And then right in my gut, right in my heart, was the loss of the mother of Zora Howard, who was the woman who wrote the play that I had just done before I went to the Huntington at page 73. Her play was called Stew. I had a video from our opening night, February 1st, of that play with Zora's mother holding my phone, egging us on to enjoy ourselves and celebrate our milestone. And a month later, she was gone. So that was hard. And then my own family, my older sister, I guess you'd call her my half sister, but I don't do half in my family. So my older sister's mother passed also due to COVID complications. So yeah, it's been rough. On the work front, you know, between COVID, the onset of COVID, and the continued murder of Black and brown bodies by police, has also been very difficult, and also requires immediate response and action. And it's interesting that it's doing so on a population of people who are most likely to be adversely impacted by all of these health crises. And that is also hard. So thinking about that, thinking about our elder artists who are also disproportionately affected and not necessarily able to have the kind of healthcare that they need. And thinking about my healthcare with Actors Equity and how it's taking a huge hit because they get contributions with work weeks, and there are no work weeks. So what are we going to do? That's been really hard. Dealing with unemployment has been extremely hard for me and my fellow colleagues, particularly because we don't always work on W-2s. Sometimes we work on 1099s. We're considered self-employed. We work out of state. It took me 13 weeks to talk to someone from the New Jersey State Department of Unemployment Insurance. Yeah, so that happened. And at the same time, I don't want to be like the downer of the group. At the same time, it's been an enormously activating, galvanizing, and energizing time when people like you, Brooke, people like all of my colleagues at the Dramatists Guild, all of my colleagues at TCG, Lori Baskin, Ralph at the DG, everyone like drawing in, Lisa Crone, everyone drawing in all of their energy and all of their resources to take action and to leverage and empower and call to action everybody that they possibly can to see to it that not just that we survive this moment, but that our role in society is restored to one of being essential. Yeah. So that's what's going on over here.
It is incredibly overwhelming, Nikkole, to digest, just hearing you articulate everything almost in a bullet point fashion. I think it's astounding to wrap your brain around the fact that we're at the same time undergoing a nationwide systemic upheaval, rectifying racial imbalances, social injustices. At the same time, we're enduring a humanitarian crisis. At the same time, we're dealing with a deadly pandemic. Yeah, a health crisis that's killing millions of people across the world.
Brooke, I just said to my friend, I said, if I were to have written this play and submitted it for production to any artistic team across the country, they all would have responded very kindly. this is an amazing play. It seems like you're tackling a lot. Maybe you should choose one thing.
Pare down.
Yeah, just focus on one thing, and this would be a better play. And I'd be like, but this is real life. This is happening.
It is. It's a time of reckoning. And I think when you I mean, thank you for being so honest and vulnerable about your personal family situations. I just kept hearing the word responsibility as you were speaking about different subjects. You know, what happened to your family, what's happening in your industry. You know, I think about the word responsibility. I think about how all of us are dealing with the idea that we must do something, you know, and if we don't do something, we'll be trampled over, or you know, or it just, things will grow to a point where there will be no, you know, there's a point of no return. And I think at this point, everyone is waking up to the idea that we each individually have a responsibility, and we have a collective responsibility, which is why I think all of us are here today. You know, why I think Be an Arts Hero is garnering some attention across the nation, is that people are understanding, oh, we need to have a collective voice in order to be heard on the Hill, because clearly we ain't been doing something right, because we're not getting the relief that we need. So
right, it's really interesting also doing that kind of advocacy work. I've been working a lot with Lori Baskin at TCG and partnering with them and the PEI at the Dramatists Guild, and actually sitting in on some of these meetings with our congressional representatives to give them a clue as to who we are and what we do and how we serve. I think they think of us as so outside of like the norm that they don't realize how much of what they do or don't do impacts our ability to live, let alone to work. And
absolutely,
I'm happy to be doing that work. And I think that we all should be doing that work. We all should be contacting our representatives daily. It doesn't cost you anything. I mean, other than the cost of your internet service and your electricity, like daily.
Which is another conversation, right?
Which is a whole nother conversation. But again, I'm quite encouraged by how much effort is being put forth on many fronts, and I think it should be many fronts. I think it should be an onslaught from every sector of our industry, from every person who has something to say. It's not too many voices. We need every single voice. We need every single initiative. We need every single everything.
Yep.
Now's the time.
Getting as loud as we possibly can until we get what we need.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the long and the short of it.
And we know how to use our voices. We've all
yes, we do. To the most. Thank you, Nikkole. I'm going to circle back around. I want to dig deeper into that with you in just a second. Thank you so much, Nikkole. And I would love to bring Nataki up when you can, Jenny. Hi, Nataki.
Yes. Hi there.
Hello. Would you mind speaking to where you were when the shutdown occurred, how this has affected OSF? I miss the community there, and it's been devastating to see everyone going through the consequences of the shutdown over the last so many months. So I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so this was my very first season at OSF, having just started a year ago, and I inherited this season. This lovely season that was put together by a group of people who know my community and this company very well, who were the arts, the major kind of arts team here at OSF. So at the moment where this thing started to really balloon, because I feel like there was a whole process in which it started that I was keenly aware of, because my team members are all keen when crisis is beginning. So a couple of weeks before, as this pandemic was growing, and the news was coming from China and then Italy, members of my team started to think about how we might respond if the crisis were to come here. So by the time this thing started to become a real crisis at OSF, my team was like 2 weeks ahead of the conversation. We were opening, I was an opening weekend, and we run from, as you know, Brooke, from March to October. So we have a 10-month calendar season, basically, or an 8-month calendar season. So we were in the middle of the opening weekend of the world premiere of The Copper Children by Karen Zacharias the world premiere adaptation. Oh, sorry, it's not a world premiere adaptation, but our company's a production of Bring Down the House by Rosa Joshi and Kate Wisniewski, which is there are 18 women on the stage killing it in the Henry VI parts 1, 2, and 3, pieced together as a 2-part beautiful piece. We were in the middle of that opening. Peter and the Starcatcher had opened. Midsummer Night's Dream Joseph Hodge was directing had opened. We were in the process of getting ready to start rehearsals for our 3 Elizabethan shows. And I was in rehearsal for the world premiere of Confederates by Dominic Morso, which I was directing. By now, we would have opened our last 2 shows, Everything That Never Happened by Sarah Mantell and Poor Yellow Rednecks by Keen Wen. I'm saying all of that because, you know, when OSF is rocking, it's about 600 company members who are making this work happen. And, you know, like 70,000, 80,000 people come up here to see, you know, to see 10 shows, 11 shows, you know, 5 show weekends. You know, they're hanging out and doing this, being able to sort of come to this this high concentration of story. And by April, we had to lay off nearly 500 people, 500 company members, all essential to the work that we do. And then by July, we had to lay off 30 more. And those second cuts, those first cuts were really, they were enormous. And if you can imagine, I'm beginning here. These are people I'm just getting to know, whose work I'm just getting to love. And then, you know, then there's nothing. And then the last 30, I think, are the ones that are sitting at the top of the little cry knot in my throat, because we had to do some strategic layoffs in order to know that we would have enough resource to maintain, so that if we are able to open in 2021, we need to make sure that we have the resource in place. I mean, so it's been devastating. These layoffs have caused real pain to the company members here at OSF and to this community. So here, what we do is the essential business. You know, we add about $120 million to the economy here in Ashland, and when we're not running, you know, Ashland really literally is sort of come down to a halt. It's a tourist town. People come to see the shows and stay in the bed and breakfasts, and, you know, and go have wine at the wineries. And when we're not running, the rest of it really doesn't run. So, and I wake up with that on my shoulders every single day. And then I wake up with the fact that, you know, it's all relative, right? So March of 2019, I was a freelance artist. And that's how I was making my living. And you know, the end of March 2020, I'm in this position, and my job is to hold the lives of the arts industry and the artists that make it happen. And I feel, you know, I had a responsibility as a freelance artist. I feel a responsibility as an arts leader to make sure that we emerge, that I'm holding this industry. And I have a responsibility to make sure that the whole industry emerges, although this industry has to emerge different than it entered this crisis. And I keep saying that the thing about the coronavirus is that it's revelatory. You know, it keeps peeling back the layers, so that if you don't know who you are, or how you're functioning, or what your theater is doing, or the impact that it has, or how your theater is going to come out at the end of a pandemic crisis that is coupled with an uprising against police brutality and the killing of Black men and women in particular, but Black and brown people all over the country are suffering at the hands of police brutality. If you don't know what your theater is going to do to come on the other side and make sure that we're serving the needs of our communities and our artists, I don't know what you're doing. You know, that's what I do every day. It's like, not just how do I save my theater, how do I save the industry, and how do I support the lives of the artists that are going to tell the stories and really fulfill that reflection that we're going to need when we're blessed enough to be on the other side of this. Those of us who survive will have an immense responsibility. And I take that responsibility right now. I carry it today because I want to be prepared. So that's where I was, and the impact on my community is real. And 14-hour Zoom days. That's what it is. If that's what I got to do, that's what I'm doing.
It wasn't lost on me, when the shutdown began, and I was checking in with all of my friends at OSF. Everyone was so appreciative of the fact that you all were trying to cover everyone with their health insurance as long as you possibly could, trying to cover everyone with housing to keep them in housing as long as you possibly could, because for you, it's the people. Your institution is run on the people. And, a little bit later, I would love to dig in deeper with you about how OSF is a cultural hub for not just the city of Ashland, but the entirety of Southern Oregon. It truly is, and I think I have immense appreciation for the way you've been navigating this crisis with so much grace as the new leader of OSF, because it's an enormous machine, and gosh darn, the toll that this has had, the economic and human toll that this has had on you and the community at OSF is it has not been easy, and I can say as a former OSF member and with so many friends in the community, it's your leadership has been so appreciated, to say the least. So I'm very grateful to have someone like you whose North Star is so in alignment with all of the ways you can take care of your people. It's just meaningful beyond words, Nataki. So I'm very happy to have you here.
I thank you so much, Brooke. The thing is that I don't know how you wouldn't get up and take that weight. I mean, that is the blessing of the opportunity of the job, is that's the weight you carry. And if you're not prepared to do that, then this isn't the right space, and so that's what I keep telling my team, take breaks. Self-care is important. Yes. We may not be able to go into the massage parlors and get our bodies taken care of, but if you need to take a moment to make sure you breathe, you do that. But you got to come back tomorrow and let's get ready to go, because we have a lot to do. I thank you for your words. I really appreciate, the acknowledgement. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nataki. And I'm going to circle back with you in a second more about OSF. And I think last but not least, Professor Michael Seman, we were just speaking with you the other day. It's so good to see you again.
Yes.
And I would love to hear about, where you are, how this has affected you, your students, your line of work. And we're going to dip in a bit in the next segment about your study. But if you could speak a little bit to, how the crisis has impacted you, I would love to hear that.
Sure. I was actually, I remember the exact moment. We at Colorado State University, we had to send home spring break. And when that decision came down, there was a group of us professors in the hallway, and realizing, wow, this is it. Now, everything changed in our industry, as I'm sure you've heard, and especially at Colorado State University in particular, because I teach in arts management, and I'm housed in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And it's a very robust program. And as you can imagine, the immediate thought was, how are we going to have plays, orchestras, ensembles, not only the performances, but the actual rehearsals going forward? So it was mid-March when the decision came down that we would suspend operations on campus after spring break. And it was then a mad dash for everybody involved to figure out, how do you get that many people and that many students within a building? How do you have a woodwind ensemble rehearse, let alone perform, when you're talking about micro droplets and such? So the summer was one of the most intense summers I've ever seen in academia. At the same time, I have a history of looking at the economic value of the arts. And I examined the creative economy after the Great Recession to see, well, how badly was this? And as the days unfolded after mid-March, I quickly realized this was going to be very bad. There's two ways to look at things. There's an economic disruption, and then there is a natural disaster, that sort of situation. And I quickly saw that this was tantamount to having a Hurricane Katrina in every part of your country and the world at the same time. And that is really very difficult to get one's head around. And knowing, my embeddedness with the arts, this was just going to be total carnage. So I immediately started to work. I was asked by the governor of Colorado, his task force, to look at how would this affect the music industry in Colorado. At the same time, I was actually working on creative economy reports for Colorado and the city of Denver, and immediately became, okay, we know how big the creative economy is, what's going to happen, and how can we help this? So it, for myself, was a mad dash. Once I started getting these numbers together, and I was receiving calls all the time, I work with Richard Florida, who is the forefront leading expert in creative economy. And I was talking with him, and we thought, well, let's look at how this is going to play out nationally. And it just was as bad as you would think it would be. But I really wanted to, I've always sworn to use my PhD for good and not evil. And I threw myself into this work so I could help people understand just the value of the arts economically and the entire creative economy. It's jobs, it's revenue. It's also, the exploration of the human experience. That is the value of the arts, but it's just so much more.
Michael, what's been so, Carson and Jenny and I like to say that your study with Professor Florida is a godsend to us, because we are taking meetings with senators and reps on the daily, and your study is just has been incredibly keen. It's the I would say that the meat and potatoes that lands our pitch in every single office. And I want to talk more about the arts as big business, because, as some of our guests have touched upon, there is, I think, an ideology of the arts and culture sector as a luxury, as something that is not a necessity. We don't get the relief that the airlines get. So why? And I want to talk about the economic impact of arts and culture in America, specifically with you. If we're one of the largest economic drivers in the nation, if we contribute up to $877 billion in value added to the economy, 5.1 million jobs, 4.5% of GDP, over 675,000 institutions across the nation, we're too big to fail. So the idea that the airlines go to Congress and they say, give us $50 billion in the CARES Act, because you can't afford to see us fail, right? You got to put a floor underneath us. And they get it, and they're asking for $25 billion more. Why is it that the arts and culture sector is getting pennies? So we're going to talk a little bit more later about our legislation, the Dawn Act. We're asking for $43.85 billion in relief, because that's proportionate. If we're just talking numbers, you can't argue with numbers. We looked at what the airlines asked for, and they got 5% of their revenue, they got 5% of their contribution as of last year. So we did the same math, and we just asked for 5% of our contribution, and that's $43.85 billion. So I wanted to ask you, can you talk more about this economic argument? In our discussion with you the other day, you spoke about how we are looking at a mass exodus from major cultural hubs. We're looking at generational shifts. If an entire generation of young people who are going to then grow up to become, people who are contributing into the economy and helping to, sustain our local economies, what's going to happen if there's just mass exodus from every major city because people can't afford to stay there because all of the institutions have imploded? Can you speak a little bit to that for me?
Yeah, there's no silver lining with the pandemic at all. And the one thing, though, that I think is important to take away that may turn people's perceptions is I like to think of it as that scene in The Wizard of Oz when the curtain comes back and you see how things are actually run. And unfortunately, this is the situation we're in right now within the arts and to the larger creative economy. There are a lot of structural precarities. The arts, as we've seen, when you shut down, and honestly, it's not just the arts, when you shut down any industry for 6 months, they're not going to survive without some sort of federal help, state help, or philanthropic help. There has to be help. The problem or the situation it's kind of interesting is, regions like city regions like New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, New Orleans, they thrive because they have the best and brightest are attracted to them, and they look for places with jobs and such that they want to live and continue adding to the economy. Well, we're in a situation now where we're in a very grave situation that because it's gone so long, we've had so little funding put towards the arts to help stabilize it, that we're starting to lose these venues. We're starting to lose these companies. Look at the Oregon Shakespeare Company. I mean, that's an unbelievable story and very, very daunting. What's going to happen if you have a city region that doesn't address their arts and broader creative economy, and they start losing these things which are actually amenities for educated or highly skilled people that work in other industries? They can move. The city region that figures out how to support their creative economy during this time, and the arts, especially the fine and performing arts, will come out of this more attractive and more stable for people that are desiring to move after college or switch jobs and to add to that region's economy. So it is in some ways competitive, but much more broadly, we're at a very difficult situation. We're at the point where we may start losing the infrastructure. I think all of us, and many of you that are watching, I'm sure, know people that have spent their entire lives in acting or in music, something, an arts discipline that they're now looking for a different job. Most of my friends work in the music industry in some capacity. 80% of them have not worked since March. And it's to the point where they are now starting to take different jobs. Now, think of that to the nonprofit administrators that work in the arts. They're at a point where they may be thinking, I need to find a different line of work. If we wait too long without substantial addressing of this issue, we're going to lose the infrastructure. And that's the people, that's the places, and everything that surrounds that in that cluster.
It's exactly that. I think what's so terrifying to me as an arts worker is that I look around and everything around me is imploding. I think what's dawning on all of us slowly but surely is most of us, I think, thought that this crisis was going to be over in a matter of weeks, and then it turned into months. And now that we're 6+ months into the crisis, 90% of music venues are reporting that they will not be able to survive the pandemic. So when I look at legislation like the Restart Act, I look at Save Our Stages, all aid is good aid. We're going to take it, right? We want the aid. But we have to talk about the deficiencies of certain bits of legislation like that and why we need something more comprehensive and long term, because at the end of the day, we need more than 6 months worth of coverage in both of those pieces of legislation. We need to not just save the infrastructures themselves, we need to save the people who work in them, and also we're talking about some legislation where you're talking about giving people loans when most arts workers cannot afford to take out loans at this point in time because they have no revenue coming in and because they have no jobs for the foreseeable future. So there, I'm so grateful for that legislation, the fact that it's on the floor, the fact that it's being talked about, the fact that there's so much support behind it. But we have to talk about a more long-term, holistic, comprehensive solution to save our entire arts and culture sector. The fact that we're a jobs multiplier, the fact that 68% of tourism is cultural, that transportation, tourism, hospitality, that they all rely on us to thrive, what is that domino effect that's just going to sweep, knock everybody down if we do not receive the funding that we need to come out of this crisis? So it's in hearing, in discussing with you and hearing your thoughts a little earlier, it's just very clear that there's clearly something wrong, right? We need to change the conversation and demand our worth, because it's just numbers. We can make the philosophical argument all we want about arts and culture and what it does to the humanities and our humanity and how it enriches us and heals us. But clearly some people don't care about that argument, right? Because how far is that really taking us? So we just got to talk numbers now, because our friends on the Hill can't argue with the numbers. And when it comes to local jobs and local economies, that's what gets their attention. So yeah, I'm very thrilled to hear more of your thoughts throughout this conversation. We're realizing that the economic argument is unimpeachable, right? We're realizing that some of these senators' offices, with one in particular, they didn't want to meet with us because they said that their state did not have an arts economy. And we wrote back and we said, well, X amount of jobs, X amount of dollars, X amount of the GDP, of your GSP. And they wrote back and they were like, oh, actually, we're going to have our senior policy council meet with you because this is an economic issue. And at the end of the meeting, it was one of our most robust meetings. And at the end of the meeting, the rep said, oh, this is nonpartisan. This is nonpartisan. This is just economics, and this is just local jobs and local economies. So, I'm just so thrilled to hear input from you throughout this conversation, because it makes that point resound, right? It hits home that we are a big business and we need to be treated as such,
Right.
And I would love to bring in. I know that Nikkole has some thoughts about what we're speaking to. Nikkole, if we can have you dip in here, if you'd want to weigh in a bit.
Oh God, I didn't mean to interrupt. I mean, you should see our private chat here. It has been robust, and I guess I forgot what I wanted to comment on from what your guest just said, but that's okay, because I want to comment on what you just said. I'm listening. That's what that means. I'm not just waiting for my turn to talk. So when I forget what I was going to say, it's because I'm listening to what is being said currently. And one of the things that you said actually hit me hard, Brooke, because I'm more of a philosophical person than I am a numbers person. And I know that we're talking to people who don't care. And at the same time, I don't understand how you can't care, because the human being is human because of narrative, because of the arts, the narrative arts, and how they manifest in music and in literary arts and in dramatic arts and in movement arts. Story is what makes human human. Otherwise, we'd just be like all the other animals. You actually can't experience your life without a narrative.
No.
Like, who are you? That's a narrative.
There's no history without narrative.
We're not essential is ridiculous. You'd be a zombie if you didn't have a narrative. And just like you don't need us necessarily to provide you with a narrative, just like you don't need a chef necessarily to cook for you, but isn't it better when they do? Like, isn't it tastier? They can do all the nutrition work for you. They can make sure that it feeds your particular healthcare needs. Like, that's what we do. That is the service we provide. So to say that it's non-essential is ridiculous. Now, have we created systems that have rendered us non-essential? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. When I was looking at Peter Mark's comment in our chat here, our private chat here, he was commenting on the business model for the theatrical world specifically as being dating back to like medieval times. This idea that you have a benefactor and if they like you, they fund you. Is just not necessarily how we need to be in the 21st century, I don't think. So yes, I'm not saying things don't need to change, but we definitely need, in this moment of possibility of change, to create the kind of system that puts us appropriately in the melee, in the world, in the photograph that is our society, which is essential.
Absolutely.
But I love to hear your strategy and the way that you and Carson and your colleagues are using our powers of communication to communicate effectively to people who ordinarily wouldn't want to listen. I'm so appreciative and proud. I'm so proud of you. And I'm going to steal all of your approaches and join the fight because all that matters is what is being communicated at the end of the day. And if
Right.
we can maintain our integrity while getting what we need in order to protect what the services we render. I mean, I was just thinking when a nurse doesn't have a hospital, does her service stop being valuable?
Right.
Or do we
Right.
turn the gymnasium around the corner into a sterile place so she can do her job?
Right.
Like, as much as I adore theater, I love theaters. I'm not saying we should get rid of theaters, but our services are essential. So they are continuing.
Right.
And we need to make sure that we are creating systems that allow them to be a part of wherever we are, that we can become shapeshifters. And I love to see theaters and how they're responding to this moment. Even theaters that have brick and mortar to their name, which many theaters do not, still finding ways to respond because we are charities. Most of the theater world, not all, but they're 501c3s. You should be serving society. What do they need and how can you provide it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We do it, and we do it on a philosophical level. We do it on a spiritual level. We do it on a humane level. We don't do it on an economic level in our hearts, but we actually also do it on an economic level.
We do both.
We do it all.
That's why they need us.
We do all things. We are essential. Please don't get me started.
I mean, no, please. We want everyone to get started because this is what the conversation's about. You know, I think about, you talk about essential workers and we talk about the idea that they need us. You know, they don't want us to fail. They shouldn't want us to do something different because they need us to be the large contributors that we are.
Brooke, they quote us. They reenact what we do at their weddings.
Everybody wants to be
us.
Everyone wants to be a musician, a rock star, a celebrity.
It's magical.
Exactly.
Because it's the beginning of creating it. The use of the imagination and the embodiment of story is the first step of the manifestation process. It's the first step between what you think and what becomes real. We actually are in the business of making thoughts real. We bring it into reality. That's what we do.
Right.
I know exactly what we do.
Right.
And it's time for our society to acknowledge that.
You know, what you said also that makes me think about a larger issue that we have all been discussing in the last few months is I am all for reform. I want reform. In order to have reform, we need our institutions to survive so that they can employ their employees. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to reform these institutions because everyone should be at this point. So I understand the fiery burn everything to the ground mentality right now, because why wouldn't we have that mentality when everything is what it is?
The chat started to blow up when your guest just said that, when he said that if we don't be careful, we're going to start to chip away at the infrastructure.
Right. Right.
I mean, bring the Nataki back. Right. I mean, I was a frequent visitor at a portion of my life to the country of Zimbabwe. Mm. And one of the things that was always said is like, oh, how sad it is that some of the more civilly war-torn countries on the continent of Africa were really chipping away at their own infrastructure, so that when civil war ceased, now you've destroyed your waterways, now you've destroyed your roads, now you've destroyed your electrical grids because you're at war. Right. And so Zimbabwe is a nation that navigated war without warfare on their infrastructure. Like, how do we say that we don't like what's going on, but nobody mess with the water?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And when you hear that the very infrastructure is now what we're concerned for, I mean, I guess I feel two ways about that. Part of me is scared because it's what I know. And then part of me is like, well, maybe it's time to learn what I don't know. I don't know. I feel two ways about that right now. Maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a new paradigm of some sort. But whether or not we need everybody who is involved is, to me, a no-brainer. Right. Everyone. Right. We need everyone.
We must all evolve, I think. I think it is both things. I think all of us are redefining our own relationships to each other and our institutions and how we all are a part of changing what this narrative is, changing what this conversation is. And Nikkole, in the next bit, I want to talk to you more about how we're shining. This is shone a light on inequality in our systems. I would love to dip into that in the next segment with you even more, because there's just so much to talk about.
Sure.
And
everybody in the chat, that was
I wish we could just read the chat.
Fired up, man.
I think, Peter, did you have something you wanted to share about? Peter, I think there was something. I don't want to skip over you.
Yeah.
Did you want to dip in?
Oh yeah, I'm like sitting, I'm seething. I mean, I can't tell you how, I have a 2,500 word piece running this week about the subject of the fact that New York it's so central to how we live that New York cannot be said to be back until theater and music venues, concert halls are open again, because there is no way you can say New York is back without those things. I also wanted to say something that you and Nikkole were talking about. No one has ever said that they've ever met an actor who said they wish they were a dentist. There is nobody in this country who doesn't value what artists do. And the problem is, though, there's a mindset also, and it extends to Congress, it extends to people in every level of power. They don't treat the arts as something necessary. They treat the people in the arts as lucky. And that mindset goes to the idea that, well, they're out of luck right now. Now they're like the rest of us, sort of. That whole mindset is so devastatingly bad. And it extends even to the efforts that you guys are in right now, lobbying Congress. I've talked to lobbyists who are there lobbying for arts funding, and they would say things to me like, in the last couple of weeks, it would have been easier to get the money in June than in September of an election year, because politicians don't want to run as supporters of the arts. This is where we're at. This is, in Europe, artists are invited on mainstream panels of talk shows to talk about the issues of the day alongside politicians and economists. They are held in high regard for their brains, for Christ's sakes. I mean, the contributions aren't, the creative economy, as you're talking about, is not only measurable in numbers, it's measurable in the quality of life, in how we live our lives. And this is going to, our intellectual, our aesthetic lives are going to shrink if we don't pay attention to these things. It's so central, and it's a very frustrating place to be. I've written about this subject for 25 years and have always felt, sort of marginal, not within a community that I love, but outside that community. And it's a mindset that maybe in this pause, along with the things that Nataki and Nikkole are talking about, and Kenney, about changing people's sense of what is important and how we look at majority white or white driven institutions. Maybe another part of this is sort of part of what you're doing, which is recognizing the incredibly irreplaceable value of the people who make the art and the people who support the people who make the art. Anyway, it gets me crazy. It just gets me crazy.
Peter, it just makes me, I was thinking about this earlier when we were carving out discussion points today. You have been a leader in your field for generations. And so you've observed generational shifts. You've observed changes in administration. You've observed societal, civic, cultural shifts over decades, right? And you're only 32, but I
right. Thank you for that.
But I would love to just hear a bit, as we're piggybacking off of what you just said. If we're in a moment now of incredible upheaval and an opportunity for change, there's a massive sea change, right? If we have this area of opportunity and a possible change in administration, who knows? How do we rewrite that narrative? How do we redefine ourselves as the arts economy, as arts as laborers? Because you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your hub, in the world of journalism. what do you think is the missing link? Because I do think we're on the cusp of a huge change right now, right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like from your vantage point?
That's a great question. It's a huge question. And there are alliances that the arts world has to form and forge that it has not totally taken advantage of. You know, when I was talking on our chat and Nikkole was responding to it, you know, this idea of begging for alms essentially is the model we use in the nonprofit sector, certainly. And that goes back indeed to the Middle Ages. That's how, you know, we think, you know, with our hat in our hands. And, you know, when for example, in 2008, you know, the financial world came crashing down, brilliant minds were brought together. I wrote a book about this, about a company that had to pay back, you know, $200 billion to the federal government. And it looked like it was an impossible task. And it was achieved through an innovative thinking of the best minds who are economic minds, who bring all together the tools from other fields. We need to bring people who have those kind of expertise, who can think creatively. I don't mean just people with lots of money who, you know, want to see good shows. I mean, you know, there are people in the world of business and finance who specialize in trying to reconstruct the infrastructure of a business and do it successfully. And I think that is that's something that has never been pursued. I'm not sure why. Maybe because this model is so strong, this idea that, you know, the two richest families in your city are going to endow the bathrooms of, you know, the new building for your theater. And that's sort of how you get along. But I do think that if there's more of a sense of bringing in allied sympathetic minds that will do this not for a fortune, but will just bring their expertise and be consultants to arts leaders. And of course, you need strong arts leaders. That's the other thing you need. You need people with strong voices in this country who are willing to stick their neck out and talk and, you know, and have bad reaction on Twitter and not be, you know, not be lionized by some portions of the country. They don't have to be liked. They have to just be effective.
This is a talking point that I want to close out the discussion with a little bit later and loop everyone back in terms of what we envision our new landscape to be. You know, what is that going to be? A federal theater project, works progress administration, an actual secretary of the arts? What a wild idea. Why don't we have one of those already if we're such a large industry? I would love to loop into that towards the end of our discussion. And Annaleigh, I was actually going to bring you back in, but I see you had a comment as well. Whenever you have a chance to bring Annaleigh back up, you know, I wanted to talk to you specifically. I wanted to dip in with you specifically about arts as laborers, because as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, you were such a model for me of what it meant to do a million things and what it meant to be a professional arts laborer. And so you've always balanced a million things: cabaret, music, theater, TV, film, etc. You know, I remember hearing about you performing in all the local dive bars when we were in school, you know, so you understand the hustle and you understand what it means to juggle a million things. And now in addition, you have a family, you know, your health insurance is tied to your employment. You have to you have to worry about childcare. So can you talk to me about that balance? Can you talk to me about that, what it is for you to sustain a life as an arts laborer, and as a woman and as a mother? I just would love to hear about that.
When I was a kid growing up in Colorado, there was a theater called the Country Dinner Playhouse. It was an equity theater, and it allowed some people in Colorado, some actors in Colorado, the opportunity to make a living as an actor. And the people who also supported them as actors backstage, the stage manager, wardrobe. And what was really interesting in my time there is I got my equity card there. And I remember when I got it, the man who ran the theater, Bill McHale, he sat me down, and he was a huge proponent of equity becoming accessible to regional theaters in the 60s and 70s. And so he made that theater an equity theater. And he said, you deserve health care. You deserve a pension like everybody else because you are working in the world like everybody else. Just because you're an actor doesn't mean you deserve these rights. And I have always taken that with me in my heart. I think there's such a lack of education amongst the general public about the life of an art maker and that it's a real job. And there's a lack of respect about it being a real form of making a living. And even to the point where my family, my extended family, who I love so much, and we had this Zoom call like in April or something to just sort of check in. And at one point somebody said, well, at least everybody still has their jobs. And me and Joe, my husband, were sort of like, we have no jobs. We have no income. Yes, we are so lucky that I have jobs that will happen someday, probably. And I was really lucky that I had some TV work that will happen someday. But they're just so used to us not knowing what's coming next that they don't even count us as having real jobs. And that, I think, is sort of like a micro of the macro. I was supposed to do Sunday in the Park with George in London this summer. And right when everything shut down, I had an interview with a theater reporter there. And we were sort of talking about the outlook. And he at one point said, we have it a lot easier here because we are recognized as an industry that needs support from the government. Their whole financial structure is completely different. So that's why I'm here today, because that needs to change. This financial structure that we have set up has not been working for hundreds of years. This doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing it like this? And again, it's not good for the financials of our community, and it's not good for social justice in our community. As a mother supporting my family, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, like this is a podcast. This isn't a podcast.
Where are you, Annaleigh?
Mom brain. I said at the beginning, we are creative people. We look ahead in a way that most people can't, and we look at today the way that most people can't. So on that note, we have been taking one day at a time, 1 month at a time, and not trying not to look too far into the future, and also trying to really reach out to the people around us. At the beginning, we were all raising so much money for the Actors Fund, and the Actors Fund has done amazing things, but some people needed money today. So yes, I'm going to give money to the Actors Fund, but also call my friend and see if they need help paying their utility bill. Those are little things that we can do within our community to help each other. As a mother and supporting my family, I have found that things, I think things have become, there's more of a conversation, there's more of an openness that there's a lack of support for people with children in our industry. So I think I feel a positive shift and more conversation. At the same time, we do such a unique job that sometimes takes 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day. And so, it's making sure that conversation is still happening at every level of the business. When somebody is a big, huge mega movie star, they have a lot more control over how their day goes. But when you are working, in a non-for-profit theater downtown and you're making $400 a week, you have to plan ahead and make that work. And nobody's really going to be able to help you with your healthcare or your childcare situation.
$400 before taxes too.
Absolutely. Before you pay out your representation as well. So again, you should be making more than $400 a week too. So there's all these rungs to the ladder. But again, I think that it's continuing to be a part of the conversation and continuing to enforce that these business models that we have set up and these social models that we have set up, they're not working. They haven't been working, and we've all just been sort of ignoring it.
Right.
So it's sort of my thoughts on those topics.
When you talk about, most off-Broadway contracts and how we're only making $400 or less a week before taxes, before paying commissions, et cetera, we had this discussion with some of the senators' offices about continued extending the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, and a specific office thought that $300 was a healthy, decent amount. And obviously our team will not so gently push back on that, because we want to ask them, can you afford to live on $1,200 a month? Can you? Because if you can't, then it's not a healthy, decent amount. So when you speak about, you shine a light on how much most theater workers are making in New York City, even if we're lucky enough to be on Broadway, every Broadway contract ends, and then your health weeks go away. But for most arts laborers in New York City, especially, when we're talking about off Broadway, you're making less than $500 a week, and that is before. So, after taxes, after commissions, you're walking away with what, $300 a week? So, who can actually live on $1,200 a month? Tell me, and in cities like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, etc. So, having with these senators' offices, Annaleigh, is that that's also they correlate it to minimum wage. Well, then that's a larger conversation. That means minimum wage is not a livable wage either. So thank you for bringing that up. It's I think it's important for people to know that they think, oh, Annaleig's rolling in money doing New York theater, the most New York theater.
I mean, again, we're very blessed, but we always are like, come over to apartment, come over, hang out at our apartment. And also, again, I just want to say again, just because we're in the arts doesn't mean, oh yeah, we know how to get through this time because we don't have jobs often. No, this is different. Nobody is coming to, and we are so far away from having a job at some point. Right. So especially when it comes to the theater, TV and film, they are figuring out how to come back. They have a completely different financial ball game. And we don't have to pack 2,000 people in a theater 8 times a week for people to build a financial base that they can actually run the show off. So again, and one last thing, theaters should not have such high rents. And scene. I will not say anything else.
Yes. Theaters should not have such high rents. Annaleigh Ashford.
And scene.
Thank you, Annaleigh. I would love to bring Kenney in. I know, Kenney, you wanted to piggyback on something in the chat there. I also wanted to speak more, Kenney. I'll wait a second. I wanted to speak some more, Kenney, about, barriers and access to government relief. We're talking about rank and file arts workers who cannot get their unemployment. We're talking about people who have lost, are losing, or are gonna lose their health insurance, or never had it to begin with because they couldn't afford it. I'm not sure exactly which point you were piggybacking off of in the chat, but I would love to hear all of your thoughts in relation to all of the things.
Absolutely. I have so many thoughts. Peter got my mind spinning. Annaleigh and Nataki and everybody just took me. Listen, I had to write down numbers because I don't like paraphrasing. So I just want to give the numbers, right? All right. So
give us the numbers.
Go. Here are the numbers. In 2019 alone, Broadway brought in $1.758 billion in sales to New York City. That's Broadway. That's 41 of the 90 theaters that Manhattan has. Okay? Right. For the hundreds... Oh, Lord, it's going to give me a heart attack. Okay, so just in the Broadway box, right? We're just talking about Times Square. You have all those waiters, bartenders, cooks who prepare the food, doormen, barbacks, busboys. You have all cabaret spaces where people perform. You have my bar that I work at, Marie's Crisis, which is completely just show tunes, and it is all for theater folk. You have all the late night entertainment that provides money for everybody else in the city. Now with that, we're just talking about New York City. I'm going to take that outside of the box, right? Mark Hirschberg in February 2019 wrote an article in Forbes breaking down the gross revenue between Broadway tours. So a Broadway show goes on tour, right? A perfect example is Waitress. This week that I'm speaking of, the last week of February 2019, Waitress brought in $990,810 on Broadway. The same weekend it was running in Texas and brought in $1,424,142. Now that money, yes, Nikkole. Now that money on tour You cannot tell me that the arts don't count and that it is just particular to New York City, because lots of people like to tell us that. And they like to say it's just specific to Los Angeles and just specific to Chicago or wherever giant theaters are. No, when a Broadway show hits a tour and stops in a city, you reap the benefits in all those hotels, all the restaurants. People who can't afford to see Hamilton are dropping whatever they can to see Hamilton, to have a night out on the town, to have dinner, rent a car, pay a babysitter, go out for drinks afterwards on top of the $300 that they spent to learn about, be in the room where it happened. So you can't tell us that we are non-essential. We are completely essential, and it is important. It is important, and I cannot say it enough. My heart's going to explode. I gotta calm down. And that's why I'm glad that you guys are doing this and brought us together. On the flip side of that, I can speak to, I'm piggybacking a little bit on what Nataki was talking about. As an artistic director, Westport, the theater that I'm in, is it's a very small theater. We seat 134, and yes, there are those contracts out there. We hire equity. We're an equity theater. We hire from the city, and based on our revenue, 40% of our revenue comes from ticket sales. And so the highest tier that I, as an equity actor who's now an artistic director, I already know how painful it is to have to say this number, but the highest tier that I have to offer in a contract is on an SPT3 contract comes to about $365 before taxes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is a New York contract in equity that offers some money. It's not much. I can't tell you the real number, because when I heard it, I was going to burn the equity handbook. But but it is something akin to like $50 or something like that, plus a subway metro card. That is what we're being valued at, and that's after years of negotiations. Years of negotiations to try to get something acceptable, and to be in the catch-22 of making sure that union members have work, right, and being able to afford it, and making sure that we stay in the union and don't leave the union. Right. Sorry, I have one last fact I have to say. I know that I'm all over the place, but it's so many things. We were talking about, I know you're going to bring it up later, about the WPA, and we were talking about having an art secretary. And I just mentioned, because it floored me when I saw it, I knew it deep down inside. This administration that we currently have is not supportive of the arts whatsoever, as we know. And this year in February, it was the fourth year that this administration wanted to do away with the National Endowment of the Arts and the NEA and the NEH, to the point to where on the letterhead it literally says stopping this. I want to make sure I don't like paraphrasing. Hold on. It is called to
Kenney with the receipts.
I always have receipts. I always have receipts. It is called Stopping Wasteful and Unnecessary Spending. Oh. So that's what the administration views the arts community as. And this also includes, please be clear, this also includes museums and parks.
I'm sure libraries as well.
And libraries. So basically, we don't care about you. And I'm glad you guys are doing this, because like you said, the numbers don't lie, which is why I wanted to go to the receipts. And you cannot tell us at 1.78 or probably 1.83, if I'm mistaken. Thank you, Jenny Gracious. Broadway raked in $1.8 billion in 2018. And that's just New York City. That is just New York City. You can't tell us that we're not a viable part of the economy and should be treated as such. And when we're gone, if and when that time comes when we are gone, I would like to see what happens to our economy.
And the harsh picture is, what economy? At that point, if we go down, that effect is going to resonate nationwide. Exactly. When we think about Broadway alone grossing over $1.83 billion, That is more than all of New York and New Jersey's sports teams combined. So if we're talking about different industries and we're talking about our value and our contributions and the relief that we receive and the respect that we garner, if you look at those numbers, if Broadway's generating $1.83 billion, which is more than all of the New York and New Jersey sports teams combined, then there is something wrong with this conversation. Then we need to be changing this conversation.
Exactly. And I think we also need to find a way, and not just New York, every community, we need to find a way to pull in the nightlife entertainers as well, because there are tons of jazz clubs, the MAC Association alone, Manhattan Association of Cabarets, they all have sister clubs. Everybody should be pulling in all their receipts together to say exactly how much it is that we are making. Right. It's not just the actors and the actresses. It's not just Broadway or off Broadway. There is art running rampant around this country that is pulling in tons of money into the economy that we're not counting. There are dollars that are not being counted on top of that. So there we go. Thank you for your time.
Right. I'm oh, please give us more. I'm so grateful to have the perspective of someone like you, Kenney, because you can speak to what it's like for the vast community of nightlife and entertainment, and so much of the time that community is forgotten. And they do not have fair access to government relief. They do not qualify in most respects. And so the barriers to access, that is a large conversation that we all need to have, because if we're going to talk about, it's one thing to talk about getting the funding. We need the funding, right? But then the next step is, what are we going to do with the funding? Which dispersal entities are we using? What are the barriers to access? How do we give everyone fair access to government relief as we navigate this crisis? I would love to bring Nataki back to speak specifically to OSF when you have a moment, Jenny. Hi, Nataki. When we go into these senator meetings, and whenever we have conversations about all of this, I always use OSF as an example, because I say, when there is a $40+ million institution that is lifting up not just the city of Ashland, but the entirety of Southern Oregon, when you have local gas station attendants, restaurant workers, hotel owners, clerks, when the surrounding economy when surrounding economy only thrives because OSF thrives, then you got a problem if OSF goes down. So, I in the news, I'm sure most people heard that you and Marissa Wolf and a couple other leaders were able to procure a $4.7 million grant from the state through the CARES Act. And so much of that was because you personally lobbied, because you personally took it on yourself to carve out that money for your institutions. Yeah. So I would love to speak about OSF's impact on your community economically. I would love to speak about how you got that money. It's just so interesting to me.
Yeah. So actually, it was $8 million to performing arts venues, performing arts centered organizations in Ashland. So very early in this pandemic crisis, a few of my fellow arts leaders up and down the state got together. They actually had been doing this for a while. The Anchor Arts Group is what they're called. It's ballet, it's opera, it's symphony, museums, and Portland Center Stage and Oregon Shakespeare Festival, all multi-million-dollar budgeted arts organizations across the state. And we basically started with having conversations with city leaders in Portland, with some of our senators, with some of our Congress folk. And the message we kept getting back is there are people on Capitol Hill who really do want to support you. There are people in the legislature in the state who really do want to support you, and they need you to make your case, and they need you to make it clear. And so we just started to work together. The art sector is 4.6% of the GDP in the United States. What is that percentage in a state like Oregon, which is a tourism state that relies heavily on people who come here from other places across the country to visit and take advantage of all the resources that we have here? So we actually worked collectively because we knew, based on a conversation that we had with Earl Blumenauer, who is the senator who brought the restaurant bill to Capitol Hill. I think he's a senator. He might be a congressman. I can't remember in this moment. But he brought that because they already had a white paper document to take. All he had to do was go in and make a case for it. And because everybody likes to eat, and they're clear that that's what they like to do, it was actually a pretty simple case. And he was actually the one that said, you all need to really start committing to cross-sector advocacy and to sort of work together to get to that resource. I do believe that the reason why we got the 8 million is because of the impact of OSF on the local economy here in Southern Oregon. I believe that the case was made, of course, statewide, but when you have so much relying on, we lay off 500 people and 5,000 people locally are affected by it in their own economic space, and 20,000 people are affected in the region. So, that case is actually really simple to make when so much relies on a theater to sustain the economy of an entire region, or to be a part of the sustaining model for that economy. And so the other thing that I'm doing now is I was like, well, let me call up my friends who are running theaters up and down this coast. Most of us are newly appointed leaders on the West Coast. So it's Marissa Wolf and Cynthia Furman, who are at Portland Center Stage. It's Jennifer Bielstein and Pam McKinnon at ACT. Megan Pressman is down at Center Theater Group. We get on a phone call weekly talking about ways to advocate as a region which is up and down this coast, just to sort of to get into the conversation around how we can advocate not just for our own theaters, because I actually believe that the reason why people can say that the arts aren't that important is because we do silo ourselves. Broadway, upstate, regional theaters, people in LORT, people outside of LORT. We segregate ourselves from one another, and then it's easy to go, oh well, individually you all really don't matter, But as an entire economy, we really do. Just like Kenney was saying, those stats are real. I actually had a conversation with one of the local winers here, vinters here. Sorry, he's not a winer. He's a venter. I had a conversation. He was like, so when are you going to get started? And I was like, yeah, that's a really good question. I was like, probably after, our governor said we can't start until there's a vaccine. And he was like, what is they did that gospel thing out in, wherever that was. And I said, yeah, I can only imagine that there is a benefactor with a gigantic checkbook who can pay for the PPE to make sure that the artists are safe, to make sure that the crews are safe, to make sure that the patrons are safe from one another in the middle of a pandemic. So when we have, if you want to support us by giving us, let me just average it out. It's probably about $100,000 a night in PPE. If you want to give that to us and make sure that we have the resource to be able to sustain ourselves through this pandemic crisis, let's have a conversation. Otherwise, let's actually take a real look at the impact of, I said, if I put my flag out, 20,000 people show up in this valley, and we've been relatively safe during this crisis. Imagine what 20,000 people do, how it would decimate this valley, health-wise. So I'm actually, that's why I'm interested in engaging in a conversation across state lines. How are we all going to come back? Not like, how can I get my theater up and going? Because that's not going to help us.
Right.
And then I also think that we had about 70% of our performers on stage were BIPOC, queer, trans, and non-binary. Mm-hmm. I'm very conscious of what this is going to do to decimate that community, mm-hmm. those artists, because it's so rare to be able to get to the point where you can actually have a regular paying job on the stage. We do have to create a model. Is it a socialist model for the arts? We do have to create a model in which we bring equity back into the conversation, so that if you do not have the resource to help support you as you're doing your arts habit, I'm an arts administrator because I had to support my directing habit. right? I mean, really, literally, that is the reason why I continued to pursue arts administration, is because it was the only way that I could work as an artist.
Right.
Right. I want to create a space in which a generation of people, they don't have to choose. They can do both if they want, but they don't have to choose one or the other. And they don't have to get rid of their arts habit so that they can sustain their lives. They can actually, move through this amazing industry that supports and sustains them because they're integral to the way we live our lives.
Right. Yes, that is the crux of it all, right? There must be something inherently wrong if we're such a large contributor to the economy, and yet we can't afford to do this work. There's something inherently wrong with that, and that must be changed. You spoke about how we all silo ourselves, and we are frankly such a huge industry with so many industries within the arts and culture sector that there needs to be the massive Arts Avengers Assemble moment, right? Like, why has that not happened?
Yes. Yes. I completely agree.
Design, advertising, music, dance, everyone's doing their own thing. But the idea that, we go to these senators' offices and they say, there's 16 different arts and cultural bills just like laying there collecting dust. It's because everyone is going in with their own individual ask. So something that Be an Arts Hero realized, and it was when Jenny, Carson, and Matthew and I realized, oh goodness, Kamala Harris's office said, write your own bill. So we wrote our own bill and we brought it to them and we're like, what do you think? This is a big ask for a big industry. And in a way, if we're not all collectively, leveraging our power, then we're weaker. So I'm so heartened by this conversation with all of you folks, because I think it reiterates that point that we do need to be leveraging our individual voices as a collective unit. And, I think when we speak about change, so this is kind of launching into our next point before we wrap it up. I want to talk about the correcting the imbalance, the inequalities in our industry. And as we look towards the future that is, looming, the promising future that we can see in the not so distant future, I want to talk about social and racial inequalities in our industries. And I want to talk about how those elements, in this time of systemic upheaval, how we can integrate all of these lessons, how we can integrate all of these principles in creating a new vision for what this hope for our community can be coming out of this crisis. I would love to bring Nikkole back to speak a little bit about that. Nikkole, when we talk about the human toll of this crisis, it's bringing to light the fact that there's already social and racial imbalance in the world. The idea that if 40 million people are evicted in the coming months, it will predominantly be Black and Hispanic communities. They will be the hardest hit. So Black and Hispanic communities are already disproportionately negatively impacted by the pandemic itself. Black and brown bodies are dying at higher rates than everyone else. So at that point, it's a 1-2 punch. People don't have a chance to survive. So I want to speak a little bit to you about the privilege we have in our communities, and with that privilege, what responsibilities we have in reforming our industries.
Well, the system is broken, and it always has been for us. I was talking with some friends of mine, and we were talking about a segregated time in our nation's history when the quote unquote Chitlin circuit was thriving, and how the arts and cultural events in segregated African American communities did the same thing for those communities economically that you've been talking about the arts in general do for American society and its economy. But even that is not sufficient. I just feel like when white people have pneumonia, Black people are dead. I'm a big picture person, Brooke. I'm not a policy person. Maybe that's why I'm not a lobbyist, or why I don't have the brain to construct the arguments that allow people who can't see the bigger picture that I see a window into the importance of what I'm saying. But I really feel like it's difficult to legislate a change of heart and mind. So basically, we're looking for policies and protocols and laws and approaches that will level and create a kind of equity. And I feel like we have done that in the past and can continue to do that. But ultimately, if people don't value each other, they will find a way to undermine the very law, protocol, policy that you've put into place to support equity. So you're kind of asking me, how do we get people to care about Black people's lives and brown people's lives and Indigenous people's lives? And in a grand scheme, in a grand way, and I know this is not very helpful to the kind of policy work that you and your colleagues are doing, or that even my colleagues are doing, but in a grand way, I feel like what needs to be done to shift the mind to view that which appears to be oppositional as complementary. So my different perspective is not a lie because it's not your perspective or your experience, but it's actually complementary to yours. So if you want to see the whole picture, if you want to experience what the truth actually is, you actually need my perspective. And you'll know, and you need to know that it's not going to be yours and you don't get to experience it. Yeah, that's a hard question.
It is incredibly complex.
Well, I just want to get to the root of it. I've been a part of very many conversations, and I'm happy to talk about all of the policy things that can happen. Like we can start by making sure that police that are being accused of murder are taken off the streets, the way that civilians are taken off the streets when they're accused of murder.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Plain and simple until that's figured out. But I actually wrote a play that it explored just this prompt: can you legislate a change of mind? And when I look at my studies and my research from history, and I see all of the ways in which the hierarchy of value that is placed on skin color and class in our nation, all of the ways in which people and organizations have attempted to dismantle that hierarchy, and all of the ways in which there have been others to find loopholes to maintain that hierarchy. I'm very interested in returning to an alignment with nature, which is not hierarchical, it's ordered. If I were to ask you, which of your organs is most important, rank them, go. You'd be like, you need them all to do exactly what they do. Neither of them is more important than the other. They are different. And we need each of those things to do what they do, but it's not ranked. We have a need, a desperate need to rank each other and rank value in the world, not just in this nation.
Right.
And that is out of alignment with nature. It's actually not true. It's actually unnatural. It's not real. So how do I stop us from doing that? Because it becomes our experience to the degree to which we uphold it. So when you talk about creating policies and procedures and new laws to dismantle that, my first inclination is like, how do I tell a story to touch your heart so that you can see that it's unnatural?
Yeah.
That is not the answer I wanted to have.
that is a very meaningful answer. I think when I hear that, it makes, so you say the prompt was, how do you legislate a change of mind? Was that what it was? The prompt?
A change of mind or a change of heart?
You know, that's incredible, because it makes me think, you know, we have been doing a lot of celebrity outreach through this campaign because we realize, you know, we need certain platforms that have larger visibility to
Absolutely.
spread the word, to get rank and file humans to care, right? But that's a really tricky, loaded thing for us, because this campaign is not about celebrity. This campaign is about laborers and workers, the people who are forgotten, you know?
I just wrote a play about that, Brooke, about what I call socialite activism, and the line that starts to be walked when you are trying to get, I wrote a play about the role that Black women play in funding Black liberation causes. But as they're more adept at funding those things, they start to undermine the very Black liberation cause that they are raising money for. So it is a catch-22, because no one has quite broken that paradigm. You just found a way to work better within it. And so when you talk about, you know, the people who would like to blow stuff up, the people who want to blow stuff up and start anew, or let the dam break and flood out, and the people who want to preserve the infrastructure. Part of the argument about the non-preserving of the infrastructure, to counter my own self in my previous comment, is that infrastructure is built on that lie.
Right.
So
yes, it is.
Why would you preserve it? Because it's going to come back up. Just like if you don't rip something out from the root, it will grow back.
Right.
And seeds are already being planted for new hate in a new generation. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the young 17-year-old man who just did what he did.
Yes.
So we've already have new roots growing for what we thought we had rooted out.
Right.
What are we going to do about that? And if we're not addressing that, how can we expect as a sector, as an industry, for it not to reflect itself in what we do?
Right.
We believe in power and money, even if we believe in it benevolently.
Right.
And no one wants to give up their privilege.
No. Because
they're afraid. Who am I? I don't know what to do about that.
It's a larger issue, right? Yeah. Something we're struggling with. And Jenny, if you don't mind bringing everybody back onto the screen, I know as we're winding up, this is getting us into the last part of our conversation. I'll hold until we're able to do that. Thing that occurred to us as we were doing outreach for this campaign is that we would reach out to A-list celebrities, and there is a sense of some folks who are out of touch because the crisis has not hit them yet. The idea that the crisis has not hit them yet. And what is so sobering and disheartening to us is that, you know, we're facing a crisis that is equal parts a humanitarian crisis and a systemic economic collapse. And it's going to affect all of us. It's just a matter of how bad and when, truly. So everyone on every rung of the ladder, from the Tyler Perrys of the world to the valet worker at Center Theater Group, you know, everyone is going to be affected by this in some way, form, or fashion. And I liken it to the COVID crisis itself. By this point, every single one of us on this call has been impacted by COVID in some way. If it wasn't us, it was our family member, a loved one, a colleague, a neighbor, a friend, right? So soon in time, the homelessness crisis, everything we're dealing with, it's going to affect all of us much in the same way. It's going to touch all of us. You know, the homelessness crisis specifically, that's a 7,000% increase. If 40 million people are evicted in the coming months, that's a 7,000% increase from a population of 567,000 homeless people in America skyrocketing to 40 million within a matter of months, right? So that's 13 out of every 100 Americans at that point. It's going to touch each of us. It's just a matter of how bad and when. So that's why we need to realize that this funding it's urgent, and we need massive immediate relief, because that's the crisis we're facing, folks. So just the fact that it hasn't touched you yet doesn't mean that it's not going to touch you. And that's why, you know, as I loop all of you in now for final thoughts, and if you want to raise your fingers to chime in, I would love to talk about, considering all of that, what's the best way forward? how do we move forward? We're still in the crisis, How do we come out of this as a collective, as a unified front, everyone who's within the arts and culture sector? We talk about the idea of an arts new deal. We talk about the idea of what our works progress administration 2.0 would look like, having a secretary of the arts implemented in our administration. Does anybody want to chime in here about how do we move forward? Kenney?
Sure. Initially, I think everything that you said earlier is what's gonna make it somewhat chug forward. We all have to be in it together. Everyone across the 4As, everybody in the, like I said earlier, in the nightlife industry, it just anyone period who's been hit by, or all of us who have been hit by this, we need to come together, and it cannot be an I situation. I always, some friends of mine, I don't know, I quote Angels of America all the time when I ever meet somebody, and when you're in those conversations and you're like, oh, this is completely about them, and it always takes me back to the angel when she first enters and just like I, that it can't be that, and we have a lot of that happening, not just with COVID in our country, period. There's a lot of and we just need to come together, and I don't know what the right answer would be. I would love for there to be a New Deal situation. I would love for there to be a theater project. History has shown us the last time that we had that, it lasted for 4 years, and the second that it got too leftist, it got taken away. So I don't know exactly, as far as political wise, what that can do, other than what you folks at Be an Artist Hero is all about, and bringing us together to be whole.
Kenney, if you had a magic lamp and a genie and you could grant yourself one wish right now to help yourself and your community, what would that one ask be? I'm just so curious, like, for any Congress people who might be watching, what would help you the most right now?
What would help me personally the most would be someone that I could actually pinpoint to right this second in Congress that I knew had our backs 110%, that I could throw all my energy and time to, that had some weight to make something happen for all of us. That would be my wish, is to have that person and not have that person to vote for, have that person in place already to make the magic happen.
Sounds like we need an arts hero.
An arts hero.
We have bipartisan, bicameral support that's coming in for this legislation that Matthew Lee Earlbach, our co-organizer, penned. And, we're very hopeful. We're very hopeful when they come back from recess on Tuesday that this bill has some real promise in getting tucked into the next COVID package. So, in that respect, Kenney, yes, we need a champion. And I do think that they're coming. They're slowly trickling in. So there's hope. I'm still holding on to some hope. Annaleigh, I would love to pass it to you. What any closing thoughts?
I'm so grateful to have spent this time on the panel today, and I just am grateful for the work that you guys are doing, because we are screaming from the rooftops that arts laborers are a part of the workforce, and obviously we are trying to instill in our country that we are part of the financial workforce, which obviously gets the ear quicker, but we are a part of the cultural heart force of this country. And without us, we have lost our magic. So again, screaming from the rooftops that we are part of the workforce, just continually making it known, educating.
Thank you, Annaleigh. Michael, I would love to hear from you, as we talk about rebuilding in all the ways. What are your thoughts you'd like to share?
It's like what I tell my students. The creative economy, the arts, it's interdisciplinary. You have to think holistic. Not only is the creative economy focused on creative products, creative goods, but it's weaved throughout an entire region's economy. So you have designers that work in aerospace. You have IT professionals that are working with theaters. You have a mix, and you have to think of it that way. And it's an enormous economic impact. I mean, everyone is so good about explaining the fact that for every job you have in the arts, your economic result is basically getting maybe 1.5 or 2 other jobs in the region. It's driving that. For every dollar spent, that dollar trickles out and becomes more dollars within the community. So again, thinking holistically, the arts also help. You can leverage other sectors entirely, like healthcare, the culinary arts, the food and beverage industry. It's a much bigger situation. Now, if I had a one wish from a genie, is that conversation can be changed. It's not just about the arts and the product. It is about the entire economy and how creative people that are in the arts, that are in design, that are in architecture, they're helping drive new entire economy.
I'm off.
Thank you, Michael. We end with a sexy pitch to all of our senator meetings, and we say there can be no full American economic recovery without a robust arts and culture recovery. The idea that our return on investment is so impressive. The arts and culture sector's economic growth rate is 4.16%, which is nearly double that of the entire nation's economic growth rate, which is 2.22%. So we always say, invest in us, pardon me, give us relief now and invest in us as we come out of this crisis, and we will be an integral part of rebuilding the nation's economy. And it's just numbers. People can't argue with numbers. And so, Michael, I would love to hear one last thought about, what's the first step you would take in rebuilding the economy, the arts and culture economy, as we come out of this crisis?
I do think there is a need for a national program of some sort that's more sustainable. Again, and I use a work of art to make this point about the economics. If you look at The Wizard of Oz, the curtains are drawn back. There are many, many challenges that we've basically been smoothing over, whether it's the music industry, theater, film. Now's the time to look at it. And like many other countries across the world, federally, we need to take a look and see how can we make this sustainable. It is a huge economic engine for our country, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have someone at like a cabinet level position that is in charge of addressing the creative economy, the arts, and really push it forward. No longer should the narrative be that it's just a starving artist, something like that. No, it's a much bigger part of our economy, and it includes everything from design to people that are working in code that are doing creative products. So it's time to rethink, and I would say a national level situation, given however the administration plays out.
Thank you for that. I think the larger part of the pitch that we have with these offices is, if you invest in us, if you bet on us, we will be the key piece that will help bring back your local jobs and your local economies. So it's a no-brainer, invest in us and we'll come through for you. Thank you so much for that, Michael. I would love to, speaking to that, local jobs and local economies, Nataki, I would love to hear any closing thoughts from you about how to move forward and as we look to rebuilding our sector.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for hosting this and for having this panel and for my amazing co-panelists. I'm humbled and filled with new information and invigorated towards the possibility of making new steps towards our future. I keep thinking about who do we want to be as an industry in 40 years, and I think about the Federal Theater Project and the New Deal and how long that lasted before there had to be another investment into some sort of broad sector arts funding, and then there was nothing, because they defunded basically the NEA, and now I think we have to think about how the art sector has to be a container for future generations. And what I mean by that is we need something that's substantial, that can hold itself, but we also need to be able to evolve it as we go, so that when somebody comes into these positions, like the one that I'm in 40 years, they have to take the helm and take out the old and put new in. And that's a part of the process for how we evolve. We have to be scoping out a little bit further than how do we just survive this industry? Because let's say we do lose 40% of this industry, goes away. That 40% will come back if we build a plan that allows for it to regenerate. If we decide that that is a part of the plan. And then the other thing goes back to something that Nikkole said, is we cannot think of our investment into inclusive and equitable and diverse practices as subsidiary to the work that we're doing. When actually, I'm very clear that I remember when the film industry was failing in the 70s, it was actually the Black filmmakers that were helping to bring it back. And in totality, the kind of resource that they brought into that industry is the reason why, the films that are famous for that time actually had something to stand on, because they used the fuel of Black filmmakers and what became Blaxploitation films to be able to seed the work of Easy Rider and, those kinds of, films from the 70s. So we are all a part of how we're going to come back. And we have to really begin to think about who we've been centering and how we need to shift the center or remove the center altogether. Because if we do not have an inclusive process by which we are clear that we are trying to center Black and brown bodies, trans, queer, LGBTQIA, people with disabilities, we are going to actually rebuild the same exact systems that we're failing at, and that we were failing at long before the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis is revelatory. It shows us what was already rotting. And if we want to build it back and regenerate it, we all have to be thinking about 40 years out, then 20, then 10, then 5. And we all have to know, and I'm actually hopeful. I know that we're going to lose a large sector of our community and our artists. I do know that, but I also know that will regenerate. It's how we regenerate that is important.
Speaking to that imbalance, Nataki, I think when I talk about Asian representation, I always say, I just want a level playing field. I'm just asking for a level playing field. But in order for there to be a level playing field, we need to disproportionately invest in the marginalized, oppressed, and disadvantaged communities, because otherwise it will still be imbalanced. So we got a lot of goddamn work to do.
Indeed we do.
Peter, I would love to hear from you about thoughts on next steps in rebuilding as we move forward.
Well, thanks, and I too will echo. I love this panel. I think it's an incredibly useful conversation to be having, and it can't happen too many times. I would point to the greater world and to the American spirit of competition and invention. Germany is giving $50 billion. It's a country 1/4 the size of the United States, and it's giving $50 billion to artists to get through this. And God knows the COVID crisis is much more intense here even than it is in Germany. And I would just, it's a challenge for Americans. And I think that the positive way to present the ask that Be an Arts Hero and other groups are making is to look at, what the money inspires in the American spirit. We're a nation that thrives on invention. We always have, on newness and invention. And what fields are more emblematic of that quest than music, theater, dance, the visual arts? That's where the inspiration is manifest. And so I would just hope that these campaigns can be inclusive enough to make people understand that it does reach everybody, that it isn't, that this is not just the 1%'s plaything, that this does reach, and it goes to Michael's own research.
You know, Peter, as you were speaking, I was thinking about other countries who are funding their arts and culture sectors. The idea that Boris Johnson provided nearly $2 billion to his sector to help safeguard the sector for future generations. That is something that we need to be doing the same. And it's greatly disheartening knowing that millions of workers and hundreds of thousands of institutions are suffering because the floor is just falling out from beneath all of us. And Nikkole, I would love to bring you back to talk about any closing thoughts with looking towards rebuilding as we come out of this crisis.
Well, Brooke, those countries know that the arts contribute to our collective narrative, and that collective narrative defines who we are to ourselves, to each other, and to the world at large. And that without that narrative, we really don't even have a program to operate. The body is just the hardware. That narrative is the software. They're investing in the software of humanity, and we should too. If I had my little genie, of course I would have a secretary for arts and culture and the arts and culture economy, maybe a cabinet member, but I'd also just have us treat each other like beloved family. And I would revolutionize not only the way we are to render our service to society as arts workers or heart force workers, which I'm totally taking, Annaleigh. But we should also revolutionize why they engage us. Right now, they engage us because they think we're here for their diversion and their enjoyment and their entertainment. But we are largely, not exclusively, but largely a part of a 501c3 structure like churches and schools, because we provide enrichment services, services that nourish you, not just provide you with enjoyment. And so creating a culture where people understand why they engage us and the value of our service will do wonders for that future that Nataki and others are talking about.
Thank you, Nikkole. Hearing you say that makes me think about something that our colleague Matthew Lee Earlbach has said before in our open letter to the 116th Congress. He cites that we are not just the humanities, we are our nation's very humanity. Mm-hmm. You know, the idea that there is no narrative without the arts and culture sector, that mm-hmm. the infrastructure, the buildings that we want to fund and keep afloat, the infrastructure is the people. And that is something that Professor Michael Seman has cited to us. The infrastructure is the people in the arts and culture sector. And we need to take care of our people. And so much of what, you know, we honed in on our thesis statement with Be an Arts Hero a couple weeks in, and we're only like 2 months old at this point. But Jenny Grace Macholm coined this. Our thesis is to keep all 5.1 million arts workers alive in their homes and with jobs to return to when the crisis subsides. We're trying to protect everyone from getting evicted. We're trying to protect everyone from losing their health insurance. And we want them all to have jobs to return to when this crisis is over. You know, this has been incredibly sobering, but also incredibly heartening, folks, to be involved with all of you thought leaders, arts leaders, and just wonderful humans in this conversation today. I don't think I've ever heard a conversation about all of this, and that's the reason why it's so necessary, right? We need to change the conversation. We need to have the conversation that we are a creative economy, that the arts and culture sector is an economy, that arts workers are laborers, and that we deserve proportionate relief from Congress, and we need it now. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you folks. Being in this room and having a conversation as robust as this is incredibly sobering to me, but it's also incredibly heartening and gives me some hope, because I know that there are leaders in our sector who are steadily working behind the scenes to bring us back strong and to bring us back in a new way, because we can't go back. We can't go back to before. There's no going back at this point. And I'm just very grateful for all of you, for what you do, for how you've contributed in such meaningful ways to all of your communities at large. And we got a long road ahead of us, but I have hope that we're finding our way, and that whatever's on the other side of this will be the change that is very desperately needed in all the ways. Thank you so much, folks, for all of your time. And for everyone who's watching, go to beanartshero.com and find out more. And please follow all of these fine folks who are on this panel today. And have a good night. Thank you very much.